Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to RealTuners Radio. It is June 19th, 2019. This is episode number 91, I think would be our number, coming up on that big 100. So, new equipment means we're totally winging it tonight, and you already can take drink number one because I'm obviously not doing a pre-recorded message. Hey, I'm doing this one in person tonight. So, real quick, the next class we have coming up for the summer is July 13th and 14th at full throttle speed. I'm doing a advanced EFI standalone tuning. Pretty cool. We've got cars lined up with individual O2 sensors per cylinder, EGTs, interesting stuff we're going to be doing at the full throttle speed dyno there. Anyway, worth checking out. Check it out at RealTuners.com. It's where you make your reservations, or if you can't figure that out or got questions, message me at scott@RealTuners.com or find us at RealTuners LLC on Facebook. So, got a bunch of interesting guys on here tonight. No special guests, but we love every one of these guys. I just want to send a huge thank you to the guys that help me with these shows as we come up on 100 episodes and nearly 200 hours of content. With some good highs, some good lows. I'll tell you, it's been an interesting couple of years. And it's also, ironically enough, 2 years ago tonight, actually, was when we actually put up the first podcast. We recorded it a week earlier, or 2 weeks earlier, but this was 2 years ago was the first podcast that we put up, so technically our 2-year anniversary. Woo! So anyway, just wanted to give a quick shout out to the guys who are going to be on here tonight. Obviously, John Bewley, Little John's Motorsport Solutions, love that guy. And I've got him muted so he can't say shit right now. This is pretty cool. I can make them be quiet. Thank you again, John, for joining us. Jimmy Bowling is here from Busher Racing, a real good friend of the show. We've had classes at his facility. Neat dude. They build some really cool stuff. Check him out. Mark Dahlquist is on here from Throttles Performance. Been there since the beginning, through the thick and the thin. So good friends of mine. We got Scott Evans on here, lead audio engineer, guru that drives all this stuff, and he's yelling at me because I went out and bought an oversimplified mixing board for doing podcasts, and I don't blame him. Brian Barnhill's on here from tunertools.com. Super happy to have that guy. Bill Fowler in the legal department. He's also the big boss at Big Hat Racing. Check those guys out. They do all kinds of neat stuff. Also provide some pretty cool legal services. Let's see here. We got Joe Timney tonight from Delaware Chassis Works. Happy to have that guy at all times. Wonderful dude. Knows his chassis stuff, safety work, and hooks us up with neat Bonneville jobs. Now let's pray to the rain gods that Bonneville is going to actually not be underwater this year. Hopefully it's nice like last year. We also got Mike Matajasic from Time Bomb Racing. These are guys we've worked with, land speed record guys on a budget. I love those guys, him and his brother. And then finally, Mark Dahlquist of Throttles Performance is on here with us tonight. Mark's been there since the beginning. Good dude, good friend of mine, great engine builder. He's got some rants for you tonight. Also, not here, but his guy has literally been on since the first show, Tom Sewell from Fuel Injector Development. And knowing Tom, he's going to dial in later. So anyway, without further ado, I will bring the guys on. How about that for an intro, guys?
I feel really special. I got mentioned twice.
Did I mention you twice? I suck at life. This is why I gotta.
Okay. It makes up for the time that you didn't mention me at all, like on the biggest podcast we ever had.
Oh, I gotta go back and edit that one. I am a bastard.
Actually, I thought it was a pretty good intro for a cappella without notes.
Right? I tried.
Andy Netherland, no, we can't do Mixler. Mixler is broken.
Mixler is broke tonight, so we went to connect to Mixler. I had the event set up and everything, and they've got some kind of emergency message when you try to stream to them that it's no longer working this evening. It's going to be down for up to many hours. I think it said something funny. So you could tell somebody's crapping over there because they have 10,000 streams at a time going. But sorry, Mixler fans, no love tonight. Anyway.
Yes, Evan, our audio quality has improved drastically in 2 years. That is for sure.
We've had some good donors help out with some good equipment on some of this stuff. I appreciate it. This one I went ahead and got on our own. I'm actually just going to probably sell a bunch of equipment from this gigantic rack I've been carrying around for the last 2 years, which I love. But they came out with a board now that does everything. So, and it's about the size of a notebook. I'm literally just going to start taking that with me. We can do all kinds of cool stuff. Let's see where this grows in the next year. I have absolutely no reason to think that this is going to have any pod fade issues. I love doing this show. Even if I had to sit here and do it alone and just blather and answer questions, I would. But super thankful for all you guys. I mean, nobody even realized it was actually our 2-year anniversary, I'm guessing. Which is kind of
I knew it was coming up because I knew we skipped a few episodes and stuff. And
I
had episode 106 in my mind, right?
No, we did. I'm looking back at the dates here, and it was something like the end of the first week in June. We made the recording over at my buddy Jay's house, and then we actually didn't find a place to host it until significantly later. We did a Facebook live feed, and then we're like, oh, I like this Mixler thing that the Power and Speed guys were doing, because I was on their podcast and I saw he did it. And so yeah, we got everything really rolling like June something 10th. But anyway, it would have been this last couple of days, but 2 years. So woohoo, everybody have a drink, and here's to having fun on this podcast or radio. It's technically a radio show.
Kevin Hulselbus says that he's missing Bewley's rants from the days of old.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, he says he misses Bewley's rants.
Well, sit tight. We got something for you tonight. Is that guy listening to is he like tapping in and listening to our pre-show or what? Because we were just talking about, man, we got to get these rants going again. I just got to be careful, man, because every rant tends to toggle somebody's legal letter coming inbound. But anyway. I
want to give a shout out to a guy that's on here, Morgan Brittenheim. And I'm going to give you a warning. If you don't follow Morgan, you might want to, unless you're a sensitive type. But he posts the funniest shit on Facebook that I've ever seen.
Morgan Brittenham is hilarious. Yeah. We like that guy.
I mean, it's absolutely hilarious. But if you're a sensitive type, you might not like it.
I'm pretty sure he's mentally not quite all there stable-wise, but I like it. Morgan, we dig it, dude. So keep it up. Don't change a thing, brother. But
he's listening tonight, so I got to say that.
That's good. No, I follow Morgan's stuff. I think he's pretty hilarious. If I see this right, Morgan's going to start doing some live streaming stuff from some of the Lights Out events. That'd be kind of cool. I'd kind of like to go do some of that myself, but we tried that before, and it's during the actual event, getting bandwidth out of there over the cell phone is impossible, which is neat on one hand and sucks on the other if you're trying to do media. But anyway.
That place is like in the middle of the Dead Sea when it comes to
it is. It is.
Bad.
You can get like analog service there, but
or remote tuning.
Yeah.
Something that might be an issue too.
Now I've already figured, dude, we figured out the remote tuning. There's a buddy of ours that brings an RV with satellite internet, and that's how we do that. So plus you're looking at logs. It's not like you have to worry about being real time, but typically that works pretty good. Man, I can't find. Go ahead. You guys want to talk amongst yourselves a minute while I work on some.
Well, we already have a couple of questions if we want to get into that.
Go ahead, man. Knock out some questions.
Because okay, so your buddy, your buddy Jay Albers.
Yeah.
He's wondering how accurately can boost be controlled, because he's thinking he wants maybe like just 3 or 4 psi, but all the way up to 8,750 RPM. Motor spins 252 psi on a dry compression test. So could you hold like 4 psi all the way up to 8,700 on a small block Chevy?
You could, but I'm just going to tell you, there's no way that Jay, and I've known Jay for like 25 years or 22 years, I think it is. And yeah, he's going to deal with 4 psi for about 18 seconds, and then he's going to turn it up to 20 like right away. So you can do dome pressure boost control, get a really lightweight spring in there, and you'd be surprised how accurately you control it from 0 all the way up. I mean, I know some pro mods that are lightweight that have to start off at 0 pounds because they're 700-inch motors or 600-some-inch motors, and they make as much torque as they need to get the car moving. So they literally will start at 0 pounds especially on sketchy surfaces. So
and Jay's car is a T bucket that's done up as an open wheel road race, but he can change the suspension a drag race. It's
super badass. Yeah,
it's
awesome.
Ride in this thing. I'm ready to drive down to Nebraska just to get a ride in this car. It's cool.
Interesting thing there is that that car, I don't know how much I want to give away, but it's funny. There's some local Honda guy that's a road racer that's just sure that car's crap. Jay's car's crap. He has no idea what this thing weighs, has no concept that the car has like full-on differential traction control. The thing will literally break your neck in every direction. because it weighs like 1,800 pounds.
Active arrow with it.
Right. And I don't. Yeah, it's interesting stuff. We'll see. I like Jay's car a lot. It's one of my local favorites. It always has been. When he decided to go EFI and he had me helped, I was tickled pink. It was a pretty badass setup.
Nolan Nike Furunk says or asks, is there a way to set up fuel pressure compensation on an MS3?
Yes, there is. In fact, it's built in. You don't even have to set it up. Do some searching on msextra.com. That's that's totally in there already. Their fuel pressure comp is actually built in.
Lee Connor wants to know, Scott, you might have fun with this. Can your new board do sounds?
Yes.
Was that a plant?
No, that's everybody's like sound effects because I said I've got sound effects in there and I've got all kinds of cool stuff.
Yeah, I'm just reading the comments.
Bill, there's no reason to get angry about it.
Oh, I'm not angry. It was just we were just talking about this before coming on, and all of a sudden somebody magically asked if you can do sound effects. And
yeah, you're straight calling Scott out on that right there, boy.
We need sound effects.
Scott Clark.
It's conceivable. I was calling him out. Yes.
Gabe Presley wants to know if Scott Clark is going to be at the Bonneville, actually physically at Bonneville during the event.
Yes.
He's stationed at Hill AFB, like 2 hours away, and he'd like to actually go this year.
Oh, dude, come on out. I'll roll out the red carpet for you. Yep, come on out.
Yeah. Yeah, Scotty will be there.
Yep, for sure. Well, now that's provided they have the damn event, right? So, I mean, that's just the weather. I don't know. Our geologist is telling us it may be a little wet, a little bit late, but maybe okay. So we'll see what happens. All right, Evans, I turned up the output. Let me know if that helps.
Joe King is having audio issues, but he appears to be the only one.
He's from Kentucky. He has all kinds of issues.
Where? Yeah.
Mixer's broken, Matt Sanford. There's no mixer tonight.
Okay.
Mike Perduto says his is coming and going about 85% there. So I don't know. Are we dropping audio, Mike?
I don't think we are. So far, so good. Anyone else tell us if everyone else says it's bad?
Jay Albers. So yes is the answer.
Right. Yes is the answer.
Oh, so Bewley, what grinds your gears?
Nope. Hold on a second. I got the intro for him.
Oh, all right.
I say that.
You know what really grinds my gears?
There it is. Let's do it again. Go ahead.
I hate to disappoint y'all tonight.
He's in a really good mood.
I'm in a really good mood. This week has been a great week for me overall, thanks to my buddy Gavin Simcoe, because it's.
Bewley's all about them square ports today.
Fuck you. That thing's an oval port.
Here it comes. I know how to start this lawnmower on one pole.
Something, I don't know. It's just been a really good week.
Shot of ether and one yank and he's off.
Yeah, it's been a really good week. Gavin, I've been working with Gavin on doing port development on stuff, and I get to flex my port development and talking about cylinder heads and chambers and stuff with Gavin and help him out and do stuff. And something that I've kind of been chasing that I felt was like a benchmark to hit with a cylinder head, a port that I helped him with hit that on Monday. So I've kind of just been on cloud nine thinking about that for like the 3 days. Yeah, the stock LS3 head is too big, but this head is 15 cc smaller than a stock LS3 head, Kevin. So it's actually sized correctly. But when, there's...
Is this where I get to say there's no such thing as too big? There's just such a thing as not enough RPM?
Yeah, either that or just not enough, mean airspeed or something like that. But,
yeah.
Dahlquist, I think you can appreciate it. He had a 15-degree...
That fucking head is awesome.
Yeah, 15-degree inline head, go 300 at 400 and 400 at 700 in the same port. And it's 250 cc, and it only has a 2165 valve in it. And I just think it's just, I don't know. To me, it's like a it's like an achievement to have a port that hit those numbers, because the normal inline valve stuff doesn't do that. A high port doesn't do that. I don't even know if nothing with a stock port location that's an inline valve head has hit those numbers up to this point that I've seen personally. So to have, a stock port location, inline valve, 15-degree head do that is kind of a big deal.
We've got Tom Vigias on tonight, so I'm waiting in the private chat for Tom to comment, because
he already sent an LOL.
I'm sure we got something coming here.
Hey, John, what kind of bore size was that measured on?
It was flowed on a 4125. The chamber was 4100 wide to clear an LS9 head gasket, 2 165 intake valve, 1600 exhaust, stock port locations, or stock valve locations rather. So no trickery with moving the valve guides, and no canted valves, no, not even it's not even a cranked over 11 or 12 degree head. It's a 15-degree head.
Jesus Christ, I'm starting to get bored now.
What's interesting? I think this is become noticeable with both factory stuff and this kind of really deep into the pool and high performance is what I would call the ever shrinking exhaust valve. Because back in the day, the camel hump, heads were a 202 intake on a 160 exhaust, and that was the thing 50 years ago. But it is interesting that, we keep seeing these kind of results, and what used to be sort of the typical proportion from intake valve seat diameter to exhaust valve seat diameter, that's moved more than the flow numbers have moved, which is fascinating.
Well, here's the thing, Bill.
Explain it. I'm not a head guy.
Here's the thing, Bill. If you have the exhaust valve is smaller, you can open it earlier and not kill it. So,
right.
And bear with me, because I do mostly naturally aspirated, and John does mostly pressurized. But the biggest issue we have with naturally aspirated is the intake side. And the smaller you make the exhaust valve, the more room you have for the intake port. The exhaust is coming out. It's under pressure. It's coming out. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I've been having those thoughts.
Exhaust ports on about every single head out there are too big.
Amen.
And these guys that put
2-inch.
Hey, Tom.
These guys that put 2-inch
John.
headers on a 600 horse LS are out to lunch. That's all I got to say.
Mark is all about that exhaust after the Calvin Elston stuff on Engine Masters. He's like all serious about that and get that exhaust right.
Well, it makes a big difference.
Side of the cylinder head.
Yeah, right. Though it's making a turn through a Pontiac
doesn't matter
port.
as much as like on a supercharged engine, where it's just going to come out. Like, and I mean like a top alcohol, funny car, top alcohol dragster. Then it's like just get it out somehow. But on a regular naturally aspirated engine that operates under normal pressure differentials, it's a big deal.
Yeah, it's interesting because we on my junk, we've grown from a 2-300 intake to a 2-400 intake, and we stayed with the 188 exhaust valve the whole time. And now the contemplation has been a 2-450 or even a 2-500 intake valve. So all without trying to do anything on the exhaust side. So it's just interesting development, Mark. Thank you for that very clarifying point about that you can open it earlier without killing it. That's very interesting. Thank you.
The other thing is that you have to watch with your intake valve is going to be bore shrouding. So there's a point where when you get too big with the intake valve, you start to hurt the flow because of bore shrouding. So keep an eye on that too, Bill. I know your Ford is a canted valve, but I don't know the cant on it. So I can't say anything. Ha ha.
A460 heads got what, 4 degrees of cant in the intake valve? Or
yeah, compound. I don't remember the numbers. It's like 12
by 4. I'm gonna have to look it up now. Hold on.
I don't know.
Warning you about keyboard pecking.
That's all right. Keyboard pecking is fine.
Which then begins to introduce us back to this whole issue of Hemi heads versus twisted wedge heads, canted valve heads, and all that sort of stuff. But
if you were to talk to Brad, one of the baddest heads out there is a Gen 3 Hemi. Plain and simple.
Intake valve is 13 by 5. Exhaust valve is 9.5 by 5.
Hey, I just saw somebody joined in and I want to shout out to here. Crystal Treadway just joined in here. She went to our class in Kansas City a couple years ago. Do you guys know the story there? Her and her dad, Mark Treadway, have this little bike that just did a naked pass at the, I got to be careful. People are going to go look at Crystal's. Naked means no fairings in land speed racing. Okay, sorry, Crystal. I apologize.
You were talking about gigantic rats.
No, I apologize. That's terrible because she's also
naked people.
She's a pretty girl too, but she's also super damn smart. She went to the class. She takes the logs off the bike. She does all kinds of stuff. She went to the tuning class, and it's a Gen 1 MS3 Pro bike, so are the ones we like. Shane Stubbs rides that bike, and I'm pretty sure he still builds the engines for that as well. It's a neat family project. And okay, Crystal, what did you guys do? 262 or 260 something without fairings on an unfaired bike? I mean, that's just
good God.
Stubbs is the fucking man, dude.
Hang on, what?
Yeah, 262 and the mile at Arkansas. Same place that, the Matty brothers went 230 something there in the car. But yeah, 260.
Can I tell you the dumbest thing I ever did on a bike?
Yeah.
So I had a 62
put your legs across it, pulled out into traffic. Yeah.
I had a Kawasaki ZX11, which in its day was not what you would consider slow. And the day before I sold it, I had to run it right to the rev chip in high gear. And which was, I think, 12,000 or 11,900, but it was about 174 miles an hour. And I ran it up there and I started slowing down and I got to what I thought was, a pedestrian speed. And I sat up above the windshield and I just about blew myself right off the bike. I mean, I was hanging on with my fingertips before I got my head back down under the windscreen.
They say 180, it gets ugly if you sit up. Yeah.
Yeah. I sat up at 130 and almost blew myself off the bike.
Yeah.
So
Scott Clark is now responsible for Crystal getting 800 friend requests. I'm so sorry, Crystal. I'm sorry. I'm sorry you're a girl, whatever, but it's still badass. She's high tech. Definitely crew chief, knows what's up.
I can't, I sat up at 130 and just about blew myself off. I can't imagine going 260 without fairings. Wow.
Oh. He's asking if you did it naked.
For reference, pedestrian speed is like 50 miles an hour, not 130.
Right. It feels like 130.
It felt like pedestrian speed after going 180.
130 triple digits is not anywhere near pedestrian speed zone. It's a little bit much.
To put it in perspective, we went 232 in the mile. I think Joe can correct me if I'm wrong. I think Stubbs went 232 at the half mile, if I'm not mistaken. He has the half mile record now on a motorcycle at 232.
God. That's
just moving.
That's badass. I helped him tune that thing back in the day a couple years ago when one of his combos hydraulic locked on him. He had porosity and some head castings or something. This is the story I have about being on the phone on remote with Shane, and he's making a pull, and all of a sudden he's on a motorcycle dyno, his dyno at his shop, and all of a sudden I hear some clunk and clunk noises, and then in the background all I hear is, oh shit. I'm like, everything okay? Finally, someone picks the phone up like 10 minutes later. It's like, yeah, motor came apart and parts of it. He took a piston in the thigh or something like that, and he's over there walking it off. Now Stubbs is like an ex-Army Ranger, or God, if I messed that up and it was something, I don't know, whatever, Navy SEAL, Army Ranger, whatever, super badass guy that go around and break necks if he needs to and jumping out of planes and shit like that. But anyway, just he was walking that one off. But some interesting stories with those guys. Good dudes. It's good to see them set that number. It's pretty cool because they are also, and I don't take this the wrong way. They're real people on a real budget, which is really cool. And then they're kicking the shit out of people who are spending like 800 times as much as they are on things and bikes and parts. So it's really cool to see. It's kind of like Mike and Dave. It's kind of like you guys, watching you guys do really well on relatively low budget and just, trading money for tenacity. So for lack of a better terms that I probably shouldn't use on here, but anyway, so yeah.
I gotta tell you, Shane Stubbs is one of the most unbelievable riders that I have ever witnessed do land speed racing. I watched him play around in the pits when we were up in Maine. He's an ex-road race rider, and he can do things with motorcycles that you can't even imagine.
Remember the tire that blew? Were you there? And was that at Matt? Oh, that was in Ohio, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Lost a tire
and he rode it right down.
Kept it vertical. Yeah.
I had the best seat in the house for that one, being the timer.
James Falgett. The most ever made on pump gas. I am not going to quote an actual horsepower number because I think that's deceptive. I will say that the best specific output that I have ever seen on pump gas was 2.61 horsepower per cubic inch at the rear tire. And it was a 390 cubic inch motor.
That's pretty good.
Wow.
That's pretty good.
Done. Holy smokes.
That
was a small stroker motor based on a 6-liter block.
Falgo lives down there in the dirty South where they have really good pump gas. I'm just going to say this. It's where you're at, James, is where it's likely going to be able to be done. They have good pump gas down there. Down on the Gulf Coast. That's all. He
doesn't need to worry about that. He just needs to worry about keeping that smoker fired up and keep sending me pictures.
God knows, right? Man, James is like my grilling go-to guy. Him and then anybody in Blake Hughes has got a whole group about that. The 417 meat report. But James is always sending me up pictures of stuff that he's cooking. I'm sure he's sending that to you too. All of those fat guys.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm not the only one that gets tortured with those pictures that he's sending.
No, do you get Anastasia's stuff that they cook?
Oh, yeah.
She's crazy too.
I get the pictures from her too.
I bought her some pasta making equipment because they hosted me at their home for a couple of weeks here last 2 months, and I needed a place to stay. Well, I was running, and I took her to Nebraska Furniture Mart down there and got her some of the, because my better half likes making homemade pasta, and Mary's a badass cook, and Anastasia's younger and getting into the cooking thing. But I was like, hey, you got to try this pasta making gear, man. She did not disappoint. Oh, God. All kinds of good stuff. Homemade pasta. Yum. Carry on.
Yeah, I got one for Billy here.
Okay.
I'm new to this stock block 5.3 stuff. I have a Jose 91/100 with trick flow 205s. I have a LJMS stage 3 that was spec'd for their 76 by the previous owner. Is there a better cam for the 91? And would there be a better head?
He would have to show me that he's pushing the stage 3 to the point where it's no longer efficient. The stage 3 is a lot of camshaft that can do a lot of work with that turbocharger and that set of heads on 325 cubic inches. And also, a lot of times cam selection and choice is basically just desired RPM range, where you want to run the motor. I mean, if you're wanting to run the motor at 8,500 RPM, the stage 3 is not necessarily the best choice for that. But at 72 to 7,300, that camshaft has got more than enough duration to make a bunch of power, because at that point, the camshaft's not dictating any kind of power. All it's doing is setting the RPM stage for the combination. So it kind of operates independently. You can, you can suck that turbo dry with two or three different camshafts and make it work. It just depends on where you want to be with some of that stuff. But the 3 is a good choice to start.
I'm reading other questions here. Looking for some anyway. Mark, you got any you want to pick out?
No,
tonight?
we kind of fizzled out for just a second.
Hope we didn't.
I got a question.
Yeah.
How about that? So I had a guy, I'm down here with Joe, and I had a guy call into the shop, land speed guy. Won't tell everybody who he is, but he's just getting started in a Turbo LS program. He's running at Bonneville pretty well, but he was down in Arkansas this past race and doing the standing mile, and he's supposed to have a LS turbocharged deal. He's running on E85. Supposed to make, it's running 30 pounds of boost, says it makes about 1,000 horsepower, but couldn't hit 200 miles an hour. I'm waiting for him to send me some log information, air intake temperature and timing and all that stuff. I just take a peek, but he's running E85 out of the pump. So is it more advantageous for him to switch to something like C16? Can you get more timing out of it? What's the, does he need to switch fuels just because he's running a pure race? It's a pure race car. It's not a street car or any of that deal. Should he even be on E85 or should he switch to C16 at that point? Just because it's a healthier fuel, I guess you could say more.
First off, you said
Tina run it at 11-to-1 air fuel. It works for everybody.
Can he get more timing out of it?
You know what really grinds my gears?
Okay, so there's not more timing. More timing is not more power. You're fucking, right. It's right timing. There's correct timing, and then everything else is fucking wrong. Okay, right. That's number one.
Say that again, Scott, so everybody hears you.
There's correct timing, and then there's incorrect timing. There's not more is more power. If more gave you more power, then find a new tuner. He wasn't doing it right.
That sounds so good. Say it one more time.
Yeah, more is not better. Okay.
Yeah.
So now, but C16 is a good fuel choice for long, hard pulls, wide open, because the way it burns, it's really hard to. It's not as influenced by hot chambers or hot inlet air temps because it's an old fuel built for blower motors without intercoolers. So C16 is my favorite gas by far.
C16 is my favorite race fuel for turbocharging.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't go any different. But yeah, he's just got the setup. He bought this car from somebody else, and he's just trying to get it to do what it's supposed to do. I mean, 30 psi, 1,000 horsepower. That thing should be running 230, 240 in the mile, not
yes, it should. It sounds
not 199. So
yeah,
I'm still waiting for a ton of information, air intake temperatures, and all that stuff because I think it's losing power over the rung versus what it actually makes in the dyno. And same thing, probably, I'm sure it's even worse at the salt. But I was just curious, does he need, get rid of the E85 out of the pump and get a stable fuel?
E85 is nothing more than glorified pump gas.
Yeah, it's 100. It's like 108 octane pump gas. It's good.
It's not gonna, is it going to make the intake charge any cooler? Probably not, right?
Not if you're spraying it into the port.
Injectors.
Not if it's an E85 motor with no supplemental injection upstream. I mean,
right.
It takes time.
Yeah. If it's an E85 motor with standard port injector locations, it's not going to do very, very little to decrease combustion temps based on heat absorbed through the latent heat of vaporization and evaporation of the fuel. It's not going to do anything. You've got to get some exposure time with the fuel in the airstream for you to get any kind of benefit from that whatsoever.
Cool.
It's not methanol.
No, it is not methanol.
Right. Yeah, obviously. Right.
There's
you
a question that was
my gears.
Oh
no, what grinds your gears,
please.
Mark? Go ahead. I want to get the Lee Connor question though. Before we're done, I want Billy to talk about that
Go
one.
ahead. I was just trying to fill the silence.
Well, so Lee Connor, I just saw his car and paid attention to it for the first time here, and man, you guys need to go check that guy's car out. That's a badass. It's a Lotus Elise. Am I right on that? Correct me if I'm wrong, Lee, but with a Billy badass bitchin' 4-cylinder Rover motor that he's built up from scratch, and he's absolutely out in left field, no call jegs for parts kind of thing. He says, cam question was mentioned by Bewley in a previous episode. Old school, smaller duration on the exhaust than the inlet for turbo application. I've seen cam specs where they have a lot more duration on the exhaust side than inlet. Is there a general rule on why you would do that? Would having more open time help when dealing with a poor exhaust port? Also, I did post another question at the top if you're looking for questions.
Duration on the exhaust lobe is all about balance between, the motor and the turbine. Trying to just, first off, you have to establish the balance between what the intake port can flow and the exhaust port can flow and what you need there. Based on like the flow percentage of the head of the ports alone. So, if you've got a head that's got a poor exhaust valve or a poor exhaust flow in comparison to intake, and then, to make sure you can evacuate the combustion chamber while the motor's running, you've got to put some more duration into it versus a port that flows well. If you've got a head that's got an exhaust port that can go 80% of what the intake port can do, you're going to see durations on the camshaft that are pretty much dead even. And then on top of that, you have another factor to balance with that as far as turbine and turbine capacity, because you're trying to balance the pressure ratio across the motor as well, your drive pressure versus boost pressure, and make sure that doesn't get too crazy. And, your exhaust valve open point can play into that factor very, very heavily. So not only... it's about a 3, 4, 5-way balance there with what you do with the exhaust lobe on a turbo engine. It can get pretty involved.
He says it's 240 on the intake and 170 on the exhaust. But Lee, just quoting peak numbers doesn't tell you the whole story either.
No, I would map it. I would map the percentages top to bottom, but what that does is that tells you, you can control the flow through the lifts with the lobe design, but just based purely off peak number alone, that's a 71% ratio. So it's actually not too bad. So, based on just the head alone, I would do cams for something like that where I am 2 to 4 over, +2, +4 on duration on the exhaust side. 1.1 is a pretty aggressive, 1-to-1 is a very aggressive ratio to be trying to achieve. It takes some work to be able to maintain that. Most of my stuff is at peak power, max RPM, I'm 1.3 to 1. And I can make horsepower safely with drive pressure up to 1.3 to 1 with boost. After that, it starts choking up and it starts affecting power production.
John, is that something that's going to move throughout the usable RPM range?
The ratio, yeah. And it changes how much boost you're running as well. So that target, because you want it down low because you want pressure delta across the wheel to put torque into the shaft of the turbocharger to get it to mechanically spool fast. I have combinations where, below 5,000, the drive pressure to boost ratio is 0.8 to 1. And without drive pressure, you can't, your shaft speeds are not going to have an acceleration rate as high as they could be. So, it's a balance. You're playing a balancing game, from idle to red line. You're playing a balancing game between the motor and the turbine, between the intake port and the exhaust port. I mean, picture a seesaw with 6 legs instead of 2, and you're trying to perfectly balance each one of them and keep every one of them dead level and dead even, and not let any of them touch the ground.
I like that analogy. I'm not sure I could draw it, but it's a good analogy, John.
I mean, that's how I feel. It's basically, it basically works. You've got this, another way of looking at it is like you've got a 6-sided star, and you've got these 6 points, which represents the 6 things you're trying to balance. And each one of those points is on a slide from the center point to the outside. And when you take one and you pull it one direction, it moves the 2 next to it a little bit, and the 2 next to those a little bit. And you're sitting here trying to draw a perfect circle with these 6 points. So this thing's perfectly balanced.
So you're really describing a spider graph, at which point you could have your 6 axes, and then you could pretty well, if you're getting data and capturing that and presenting it in that 6-axis spider graph, that would be a very interesting thing to be able to look at, as far as you could just look at it and see how you are in that balance. I don't know if anybody makes anything like that or presents it in that way, but it seems logical.
Yeah, it's
Scott, can you do that?
Say that again.
Oh, I just said, if you did a 6-axis spider graph, you're a IT guy. You've seen a million spider graphs in the world. So
I have.
I'm just throwing that out there as a nice visual.
As Scott goes out and Googles spider graph. I've seen a lot of scatter plots. I don't know if that's the same thing.
No, just picture 6 scales 60 degrees apart.
Sure.
That are 0 at the center point and 100 at the outside point. And then, connect each of those with, a dotted line that can change. And then, when you move one, it basically moves every single one that touches it a little bit, as you move any one single slide from between 0 and 100. And you're just trying to strike a balance, because balance is the most important thing in a turbo engine. And, building the motor to consume the right amount of air to provide you the correct pressures to achieve maximum airflow out of the compressor and the turbine wheel. Because you can't have flow without pressure, because the compressor maps 3D and it moves different masses at different pressure ratios on the map. So, turbo engines, you don't just build this motor to make X power and then, hey, we're just going to go throw something on it and turn it up. That works until you get to the limit of the compressor. Until you get off the right-hand side of it, where your efficiencies kind of go away a little bit. But you've got to know where your compressor likes to run. If you know where your compressor likes to run, and you know how much air mass that it can move at its most of, at the maximum flow rate, then you have a horsepower target to build an engine to.
I love it when guys send me tech support questions, not realizing that we're doing a podcast. Hey, I'm on a podcast. Can I get back with you? Why do they always come right now?
I'm not gonna call anybody out, but I got James Falgood up in my PM box saying, "Boy, you lucky I can't post pictures to that live feed."
Oh, I'm not even sure I understand this question, Jake. In a post earlier, he saw you talking about not incorporating AFR target. Is that EGO correct? At what point would you start using EGO? MS3 Pro Gen 1 utilizing quote-unquote perfect EGO new beta firmware. Oh, good God. Be afraid of beta. That's my input. Scott, any input?
Beta firmware?
Yeah.
Ask me what ECU was he talking about?
MS3 Pro Gen 1.
Okay.
Using quote-unquote perfect EGO. He's talking about not incorporating an AFR target. Is EGO correct?
He asked about that later. Nah, so incorporate AFR target is an option that's Never worked for me on the MS3 firmware. I always disable it. It's supposedly, I think that the long and short of it is supposed to be so that you can change your AFR table and the VE calculation will automatically track that. So if you change your targets, you won't need to go change the VE later. But all I know is that for me, it's completely screws up the required fuel variable and the VE scaling. So I disable it. But I don't know. There was a post about that today, and that's probably who it is who's talking about it. But I haven't had good luck getting realistic VE numbers out of MS3 firmwares in quite some time. Not that it matters. I mean, I've tuned a bunch of them, but they've run fine. It's just that I don't know. I'm told there's something goofy with the math, and I'm a little disappointed in the PIDs have been dicked with in this latest one, and don't seem to be working right. So I use simple method for closed loop correction. If you set that up right, you can nail it, so it doesn't matter. But that's my thoughts on that. I'm actually okay with using some of the beta firmware. They've got their new beta now. Just keep track on msextra.com what problems they're having, if they have any bugs or whatever. There's enough guys that use that they're really good at keeping you up to speed on what to look out for. I mean, I don't want to dog the Megasquirt, the guys that write that firmware, because they make changes. Well, they used to anyway. They used to make changes overnight if we found problems. This last series of updates took a long time to come out, but hopefully they get back on the bus get quicker.
I'm kind of like, if it's working great, don't mess with it.
Yeah, for sure.
Matt Sanford's question: what kind of pound per hour airflow to horsepower ratio do I see? When I first started, I felt 10-to-1 was a big number, an achievable number. Nowadays, that number is growing with some of these new wheel designs that we're seeing. Seems like guys are squeaking 11, maybe 12 out of them. You know, it seems like the motors are getting more efficient, and that ratio is growing just a little bit. I usually do about 11 horsepower per pound now. It's just a rule of thumb, basic math thing.
Cool.
Chase Griffiths, your question
you were talking about today.
But Chase Griffiths, your question is what's the best bang for the buck? And then you say you want to spin at 8,500 RPM. Bang for the buck and 8,500 RPM don't belong in the same sentence. That being said, I think, John, you like that TFS head. He wants to know the best bang for the buck Cathedral port head for a 4030 bore turbo LS. He's got 243s now. He wants to go something with a thicker deck that won't break the bank. But then he says he wants to spin at 8,500.
Kind of depends on also the stroke of the motor. If this is a 4030 bore motor with a 4.8 crank, an ASCAS 220 has enough cross-sectional area and enough valve to go 8 to 8,200. We've taken that head to 8,200, taken a 2-inch valve to 8,200 with a short stroke. You put stroke in it, 3625 stroke, I'd be looking at probably a 235 with a 2080 valve to get there with the right intake. I'd put if it's a 4030 bore, 3625 stroke, typical 370 and a stock block, I'd probably put a 235 on it with a BTR intake, and you're going to need a fairly good sized camshaft to get up there. But it can be done. It can be done. I mean, if we can get a 706 head to peak at north of 8,000 on a 4.8, you can get there.
It's all about CFM demand per cubic inch.
Mm-hmm. With adjustments for pressure, density. I think when you start cranking the density of one of those motors up, I think the CFM that you would do on that math naturally aspirated takes you a little bit farther. Stock stroke. Yeah, 370-inch motor, I would probably do a 235. The 235's got a 2080 intake valve, and I think that's enough valve to get where you need to go. It flows 350-ish on the intake port. Really good head. The baby 245.
I'll mention also, John, be careful of the throat size for the head choice.
Yep.
Some of these heads come through small throat. Some come through with much bigger throats. The throat is actually the window, not the valve.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's when you start talking valve sizes, most time I speak in with the valve job geometry being kind of the same. So, I have a throat percentage in mind that I'm thinking that works, but that I don't necessarily and what I do, the geometry on the valve job doesn't change that much. So everything's a 45 and the throat diameter to valve size is about the same on everything. So yeah.
Tom, is throat size and cross-sectional area, are those terms interchangeable, or am I mixing my terms here?
Well, throat is usually
area of the port, curtain area of the valve.
Not curtain area of the valve, cross-sectional area, meaning at the smallest area of the port. So, and maybe I've been misinformed on how I'm supposed to use that term, but I was told cross-sectional areas usually applied somewhere in the vicinity of the short turn radius or somewhere there where the port is the smallest.
Yeah, that's minimal cross-section.
Yeah, there are different theories out there and in a naturally aspirated, all-out environment, you always try to get the throat to be the smallest. You can't do that with certain architecture. Low port stuff, generally the push rod pinch is the smallest, so it's upstream. But for discussion's sake, typically you would like to see the throat sectional area and that size percentage to the actual valve size being used. So that becomes your flow window. Like I was mentioning to John, if a guy's got a Brodex head or an AFR head or a trick flow head, and they're all a 2080 intake valve, each manufacturer may have the throat size differently. One may be at 87%, one might be at 90%, 91%. So be careful, not all heads are the same size.
Whoa.
Somebody was
hurting there, breaking up. Who was? I don't even know who that was.
I wasn't paying attention either. Chris Smith. Oh, it's Bill.
Do you know who Chris Smith is, first, Bewley? Don't bullshit that guy. I'm just saying.
I'm not bullshitting with him. I don't. He said 90% was kind of hard to hit with a 45, and
he's a road race guy, but he builds some of the baddest road racing engines on the planet. So
yeah, I don't agree wholeheartedly that 90% is hard to hit with a 45-degree seat. I can get there pretty good. The valve jobs that are done on the heads that I use can hit 90% on a 45-degree seat pretty easy. With the angles and stuff that are involved in that with the bowl.
Don't make me play my cricket noise.
Cricket.
Anyway. Yay, sound effects. Okay. What else we got?
Chris, I'd like to talk to you about the Brodex head that I was helping with today. You might be interested in hearing something like the actual technical aspects of what that head is, with valve jobs and throat and MCSA and locations of MCSA and stuff. It's a really cool head that I think we got lucky that the architecture of the head allowed us to get what we got out of it.
Let's see what else. Anybody else got questions? Y'all mofos better keep asking or we'll just cut it loose for the night. Hold on a second. Here we go. I got some on YouTube I've been reading. Where the heck have you been, Dahlquist? You supposed to read this? Is there an optimum IAT to run methanol?
I'm not on YouTube. Who's asking that?
Sorry, Nathan Keller. Is there an optimal IAT to run methanol? First off, above the dew point. I know that. And second of all, methanol. I haven't. My gut says it doesn't like super cold, but I think you're 80 to 150 Fahrenheit
below
inlet air
about
temps.
60 degrees Fahrenheit is when it starts to really have issues. If you've got a 55-degree day, it will not want to light off very nice for you until you get a little heat in the engine. You get just a tiny bit in the engine to begin with. I mean, literally a cap full of gas just to get a first couple little bits. It'll pop right off every time after you have some heat in there. But if you have it's been sitting and it's cold and hasn't been touched, below about 60 degrees is when it starts having issues.
Wow, it got quiet.
Sorry, so someone asked, I'm sitting here answering all these questions by typing. I should just read them out. So Big Block 406 TA says, how long will a 4.9 sensor last on C16? I got 7 runs on the one that came with the Holley Terminator X. So here's the deal on the 4.9s. You may have sat through the Bosch presentation at PRI and gotten smoke blown up your ass. Sorry. There's another podcast you can listen to where a guy dogs me for sitting in that, and anyway, and they're mad at me because I pointed out that they didn't work as well. But 4.9 sensors like heat. I've got them living on a nitrous car for like 3 seasons now, or like right at the exhaust port, which would seem to be a no-no on a big nitrous car. But so they like the heat. Keep the wet fuel off of them. Your problem, most likely, what I've seen from sensors dying on, especially on the leaded fuels and on the alcohol, is too much tip and enrichment. If you're using the default Holley tunes, and most of them have both map-based and TPS, throttle position-based Excel enrichments turned on, and they dump the fuel when you slap the throttle by default, hit me up offline. I can walk you through learning or adjusting that, or if you want to do a remote or something, we can figure something out. But I can walk you through. But anyway, long story short, keep the wet fuel off the 4.9 sensors especially. The next one here, Kill Switch. Just messing around with Big Stuff 3. Good box, by the way. Old, but good. The main table is in volumetric efficiency, but nitrous table is in alpha N in pounds per hour. Is there a conversion for VE with 2200 cc injectors and C16? What I do is figure out what roughly horsepower shot you're about ready to spray into it, okay? And then I figure out what horsepower you're making at the wheel naturally aspirated, and you use those as a percentage of each other. Okay, so if I'm going to, and honestly, it's not actually increasing your VE, but this is how you work the fuel model on these simpler systems. If I was going to increase the total power 30%, then add 30% numbers to your fuel flow or to your VE, just to give you some ideas. Hit me up offline if you need some help with that one. Oh, here we go. Another one. Jonathan Woodson. Would you guys mind elaborating on the negative effects of going below the dew point temp on an air-to-water intercooler setup on E85 and pump gas? I can tell you my experience. So we didn't... First off, it hit me at Bonneville one year. Oh, man, we had it so cold. It was like, below freezing or right at freezing. It was like 35 degrees inlet air temps with some really iced down stuff, and the car goes out there and just sputters and runs like ass. Never figured that out, but as it got hotter, things came around. Another maybe 6 or 8 months later, I'm on the engine dyno with Papa John Huber, who, rest in peace, man. We lost him last year, but just literally my number one go-to smart guy, just with all things engine related. And he figured out on the engine dyno we were having a similar problem, and he figured out, well, you dummy, you're taking the intercooler air temps well below the dew point, and we made a poll, engine sputters, and then he goes in and he pulls off a lower intercooler pipe, and like 2 gallons of water come out of this thing. And he was an engineer at Ford, so he actually did the math to figure out on this little 1200 horsepower 2.3 Pinto motor that the Hubers raced forever, that he figured out and calculated how much air and how much moisture based on the humidity. Dude was all over it. And he was the one that pointed out, well, you got to keep it above the dew point temperature. Otherwise, you're going to run a bunch of water through the motor. And that was all we figured out. So that's my understanding, my weak understanding. There are going to be smarter guys listening to this podcast than me, but the lesson I learned was keep it above the dew point. Get on airdensityonline.com or Weather Underground and figure out from your local nearest airport, because they have the most accurate data, what is the current dew point in temperature, okay? And you want to stay above that. That's all.
So, Casey Allen, let's talk about squish.
What
so
is
the majority of people confuse squish with piston to head clearance, and they're related, but they're different. And the best way I can talk about squish would be is to study a two-stroke with a domed combustion chamber, and you'll notice that in the dome combustion chamber there's a flat around the outside that's called the squish band. And if you have a small block Chevy, like a 23 degree head, and you have say 40 thousandths piston to head clearance, you've got this enormous squish area, which is not necessarily desirable. And that would be an example of where squish and piston head are the same. However, if you talk about a big block Chevy and you have the great big domes on the pistons and you still have 40 thousandths piston head, that's not squish. So squish would be the flat area around the outside of the bore where the piston and the cylinder head are at the same angle, and you can control squish at 30 thousandths, 40 thousandths, 45, whatever you want. But the best example would be to look at the dome on a two-stroke engine and the dome combustion chamber on a two-stroke engine and see how it's done. And you'll see a squish band, and they control the squish band at, say, like 130 thousandths wide or 140 thousandths wide, somewhere in there. And that is to create, as I understand it, and Tom might have some input on this, but it's to create turbulence at the outside edges, or activity at the outside edges of the bore. I may not have explained it very well because I wasn't prepared to answer that question, but there's an awful lot of people that confuse squish with piston head clearance, and it's not necessarily the same thing. Anyone have anything to add to that?
Nah, you did a good enough job.
I think you nailed it right on the head.
That's above my pay grade.
The best example is go look at a two-stroke.
Keep them questions coming. Don't make me cut this off.
I want to cycle back to that 4.9 question, just to say another thing you can do to help keep the fuels off of that sensor is to add like a sample tube or a heat bung extension to them to get it so that the tip is not way down in the pipe where it's most susceptible to those wet fuels, which also helps with heat and lifespan on sensors as well.
Derek Woods asks, how will increasing the hot side change the spool in response to the wastegates? Undersized on my gates with twin 366s and 40 millimeter gates, will increasing the hot side size inherently slow exhaust velocity? Is mass flow all that matters to the gates, or does velocity and location play a role just as much as the size? Velocity does play a role in that, especially if you have poor location. Exhaust doesn't like to turn. It's like any other fluid, that's in motion. So if your location's not good and you have high airspeed, it's not going to want to split off and go to the gate out of the tube. So if you slow it down, it can make the turn a little easier, and it might improve your wastegate response.
Or if you put the gate in the right spot.
And the next words out of my mouth were, if you rework the hot side to move the gates to a better location and pick up a better location, you may not have to increase the size to get that improvement in response. good location, good priority to the gate feed tube is paramount for good wastegate, response, and in turn, good control. And I don't necessarily feel that 40s are undersized for 366s, depending on the size of the motor. For a 5.3 to a 370, they're sized about right. If they're it sounds to me like you got the gate in the wrong spot and it's not getting good priority. So what you're trying to fix might be fixed with just moving the gate instead of completely changing the size of your hot side to slow your air speeds down.
A long tube leading up to the gate is also a bad thing.
Yep. Yeah, you want the feed tube length to the face of the valve to be as short as possible. Well, Rick, take cover if there's a tornado in your backyard, brother. Go.
Yeah, you can always re-listen to us later.
Go
find safe cover.
Go get
or
cover for crying out loud.
There with your camcorder.
Yeah, I mean, don't
get a camera. Yeah,
don't go get your American flag and your shotgun, and you ain't going to get me Nader while standing on the back porch or nothing.
But did you guys see the guy that made the hit?
That's a little risky.
Did you guys see the guy that made the hit at the track last week with the tornado in the background?
Oh yeah.
Dude, I was just saying that at lunch today. Like, that dude's a fucking hero. Like, I need to know who that is.
Oh, dude, there's a video of it. There's not just a picture of it.
I know. I saw the picture for a couple of days. Then I saw a video, and I saw the guy actually sent it. I was like, well, yeah. Gotta do that.
The good news is tornadoes follow wind currents, and so at least you can predict a general direction they're going to go if they're off in the distance and traveling already. So he might have been perfectly safe knowing that, it's going across there. I'm fine. It ain't coming my way.
I like it better if he wasn't sure if he was safe or not, but he did it.
No, let me throw this out there as a pilot and kind of a weather nerd. The tornadoes can actually follow the winds aloft. Depends on where they start from. And the winds aloft will change 360, 180 degrees as you go up every 1,000 feet or so, or sometimes every 500 feet. Just throwing that out there. They can actually, generally where we live in Tornado Alley, they'll follow a southwest to northeast pattern. But a couple of them this year have done some weird traveling where they went like northwest to southeast a little ways. It's kind of weird.
Is it just me, or every time I see a tornado video these days, I see wind turbines in the background of the shot, when they're shot during the late afternoon, early evening? I'm beginning to think there's a correlation to where those things are and where the tornadoes hit that may even be more powerful than the mobile home correlation.
Tornadoes like to form where there's the least path of resistance. So wherever the air can start swirling and move without a bunch of other stuff in the way, that's where they like to start. So big open field with a few thin sticks is a perfect place for them to start.
You guys got
wind turbines cause tornadoes, right? That's what we're saying.
They cause wind cancer.
I just had a tornado. Join me in the theater room here. Somebody was pissed that she was locked out of the room.
Oh boy.
I got barked at.
Derek, your second statement kind of clears things up a little bit. Going from a 5.7 to a 427 with a pair of 366s, the 40s got real small real quick there with that increase in displacement. So, I can see why you're doing what you're doing. I think you're on the right path, and you need to, when you choose your new location for your gates, if you choose to try to run the 40s, you really need to make daggone sure you've got them on the outside of a 90 band or a 45 band, and give the gate as much priority with as short of a feed tube as you possibly can to get the best control out of that situation.
I got a question to add to you, Bewley, on that one. How do you feel about the wastegate dumps going back into the downpipes?
You have
any negative effect?
Yes, they have an effect. You have to compensate for recirculation. If you don't, you'll kill the pressure delta across the turbine. Turbines don't actually work with shoving exhaust through them. They work off of pressure and temperature differential. So the higher the P delt across the wheel, the more torque it will exert on the shaft. So if you've got 40 pounds in front and 0 pounds behind, and then you crack the gate and all of a sudden you've got 40 pounds in front, still at the throat of the inlet of the turbine, and you've got 10 or 12 pounds behind, you've killed your P delt by 25% or better. So I prefer everything vented to Atmo. People that feel the need to recirculate for sound and drivability, just comfort reasons and noise reasons and things like that, I tell them that they really need to make sure that they merge back into the downpipe at least a 45-degree angle. Do not put your dumps back into your downpipes at 90 degrees to the center line of the downpipe.
Well,
At least a 45, and I would prefer them not be joined back in any closer to the turbine than 18 to 20 inches.
Okay. Yeah, because we have ours actually going back into the downpipe for packaging issues, because I can't really get it out anywhere else based on the location. Really tight packaging, so we put it back in the downpipe, but it's in at 90 degrees and it's not 20 inches. Well, it's over 20 inches from the compressor.
But still, if you're in at 90 and it's dumping, and when they open and dump, that you've got one tube putting gas into a tube 90 degrees to what's flowing in the tube, and it can create turbulence, and turbulence in a pipe raises the pressure in the pipe.
Right.
So,
Gotcha.
If you had the ability to monitor pressures like before and after the junction, you could see what happens when the gate, when the gate's cracked and it dumped it back in. Jason, that's the reason for putting it in on an angle, because if you put it in on an angle and you leave a little tube in there and you create it almost like one of the header evac nozzles that get put in a header, the exhaust flowing through the downpipe can actually help pull exhaust out of the dump tube from the gate. It can actually make the gates more efficient. And, you need less travel on the gate to accomplish the job. And as far as your blow-off valve question, my opinion on blow-off valves is closer to the throttle body, because the throttle body is the point that creates the reversion in the tube, what makes it change direction. So the closer it is to the throttle body, the less the air has to fight going back before it can actually be vented out. I prefer them within 6 inches of the throttle body personally. And that's depending on if you've got a short cold side, and the guys with the big coolers in the back, they need one on both sides of the cooler because there's so much volume in the cold side. One blow-off valve can't get it all out in a timely manner anyway.
So, what else? Bueller?
Hey, going back to that very low boost thing at the very beginning of the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I know, Scott, that we had some wastegate diaphragms that were ripped. I was talking to somebody else, and I can't remember who it was, talking about kind of weaker springs in the wastegates ripping diaphragms because...
Oh, yeah. Well, because you crazy motherfuckers turning it down to 70 pounds of boost. No, I didn't think about that when we had that problem with you guys' car here a couple weeks ago.
Because I think initially we only had like 5 or 10 pounds.
Yeah, but we were putting like 100 pounds on the dome to keep it shut, and we were tearing diaphragms repeatedly on the gates.
That's the reason why you don't need to be running gates with diaphragms if you're trying to run 100 pounds in the actuator.
Let us know that, because it's not very often.
Diaphragms for something like that. In my opinion, that's the reason JGS gates are as successful as they are, and one of the reasons why I use them a lot, because it's a piston style gate, and it's got a dual 1/4 inch O-ring seal between the actuator housing and the piston. So there's no rubber diaphragm to tear if you're trying to shove, you're trying to pin the gate shut and and keep it closed. My opinion on the deal about trying to keep boost down at ultra high RPM is gates are a bypass valve. The less boost you try to run, the more gate that you need. If somebody's trying to run 5 pounds at redline at 8,500 RPM based on the size of the motor, I would be up one gate size over what would be considered normal for that application.
About 244 millimeter gates on one turbo and 122 cubic inches.
Yeah, you got all kinds of gate. You could run like 2 psi at 9,000 RPM.
And we had that capability, but I don't know.
Yeah. One of the things that I see with diaphragm gates too is they don't like to travel a lot. They don't like to have an extremely high, they don't want to be 100% open because that significantly compromises diaphragm life. About if you're pushing it to its maximum travel, opening it up, they cannot, they can rip and they can tear. As far as that's concerned, and in my opinion, that's another advantage that the JGS gate has, because there's no difference in that gate at completely closed to completely open. You're not the diaphragm, it's not dynamic. The part doesn't change. It just changes position, right? Because the diaphragm's got to stretch and this, that, and the other to move and change position.
Gotcha.
Man, I'm tempted. Chris Smith is over here talking to me on the side, and he's won too many Miller Lights into it tonight, but he was talking about the deal on the heads. He liked what you guys had to say, but it's interesting. He's got some, what did he say here? 2.88. 2 times 0.88 equals 1.76. 2.4 times 0.91 equals 2.184. His point is it takes about an eighth per side to bend it around the valve. Talking about airflow. And the 50-degree valve job does a bunch of other good stuff, too, with big duration, but that's the best stuff I've heard yet. That guy was good, whichever one he was talking. So anyway, thanks, Chris. We're going to have him on next week, I think. We
can talk cylinder heads and valve jobs.
Yeah.
I'm down with that.
Right. And he worked with, he's won an Engine Masters, and they worked with Panos for years, and that whole, they've gone through a bunch of name changes, things differently over the years, but he's been, they built some badass small block Fords too, but all kinds of cool stuff they build. Just anything road racing that's actually got to make power naturally aspirated, right? So,
yeah.
What I like about them is they race in classes where you got to do development work. It's not just, hey, buy a spec package.
Yeah, Brent Winans says, can you talk about charge pipe length? Can it be too long? I understand there'll be more lag on a system for a drag race application. What are the cons? There's measurable difference when you start talking these systems where guys have got the intercooler in the back of the car. There are measurable, visible differences to how long it takes to bring the pressure up in the whole system versus a short system like a non-intercooled alcohol car where they've got 3 foot of tubing. I mean, it's just a difference in volume. Can there be too long? That depends on application. In my opinion, in drag racing, no, because if you're staging the car, at RPM, at boost, you will, there'll be a mechanical limit to how quickly you can get the pressure in the manifold up, but it's not as critical as an alternative in alternate applications, say like road racing or something. If you're building a road racing car, you wouldn't want to put the intercooler in the trunk and have 25 foot of tubing to fill, based on, transient response of having to fill that volume every time you're on and off the throttle. So it's definitely application specific, but for drag racing applications, it's not as critical as others, in my opinion. And somebody else had another one. Matt Cole asked, can you have too much gate? Yes, you can have too much gate. I've seen guys take a small block and slap a couple of 60s on it, and then they try and run manifold pressure to control the gate, and it gets into a PID oscillation where the gate's always chasing target. It never lands on target and stays steady on target. You know, it's always, oh, well, I overshot. Now I've got to compensate and come back down. Oh, well, I overshot. I got to compensate and go back up. You know, I've seen traces where that's happened, and the gate position and, you know, the CO2 on the thing. If you're really good with your PIDs, you can run it down to the nth degree and make it land on target and stay, but it's not an easy thing to do.
What else we got? Anybody? It's only 9:20. Come on, Central Time. We can go another 40 minutes if you want to, or we can just cut it off.
Scott, can we talk about how good networking your classes can be?
How good of networking?
Yeah.
Yeah, fire away.
You want to know what happened to me today? Eric Andis, I think is how you say his name. He came to our class that you had at my shop.
Yeah.
He bought our van today.
Oh man, I wanted to.
Van that I've been trying to get rid of for like 6 months or so.
I was super tempted on that van. Man, that thing would almost be perfect for me, but I was like, no, that would promote way too much traveling tuning.
It's pretty dope, but I want a stacker and a toter sometime in the next couple of years. Yeah. I'll go from an 01 Silverado to a stacker and a toter. That's been my dream.
Right.
I got rid of the tuning van.
Sweet. No, that's cool. I'm glad to hear. Eric Andrus bought it?
Yeah.
So we need to talk to him about that. I'm going to see what he's going to do with that. You have to tell me offline what you ended up getting rid of that for. Because like,
actually, a lot of the things about Scott's classes are the people you meet there.
Yeah, that's 100% it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's
if you're at Jimmy's shop, you get snowed in. It snows 36 inches of snow in 48-hour period. That was always a good. You have to really get to know the 25 other dudes you're hanging out with then. But,
yeah, and I got to be on the dyno all week and outside in the cold while everybody was in the class, and I was sick the entire next week.
Team Viewer for the win. We put TeamViewer on his dyno computer and on the car, and we had him on the phone. We're like, all right, make a poll. We're all inside the room. But that's my Mo Lones trick from Mo Lones trick from down in Kansas City, down in Bonner Springs at LSX Killer. Those guys do he's got TeamViewer on everything. And he literally can just hit whatever computer in his life that he needs to, home or at work, or the dynos. He's got dynos spread all across the country. But anyway,
it's amazing for me having the two different shops. Like it works out very good. Team Viewer for life everywhere.
Right. I need to talk to you offline. I did a whole bunch I got that dyno figured out this week that I was calling for asking you settings questions on, and learned some really cool stuff. And I got this one to be super repeatable and did all kinds of tests at different booths.
On the smart tech stuff?
Yeah, got the smart tech stuff happy, and then got got everything else happy, all the barometric and weather stuff, and we got it so it was super repeatable on this car. Did it over 2 days. It was neat. So I'll talk to you offline. Anyway.
Yeah, the real question is like, first of all, you didn't confirm whether you were able to make it this week, or if you're going to be remoting in for Streetcar Takeover. Like, what do you think we're going to run with this car?
Man, I have no idea, but I mean, considering what it's been and what it made on your dyno, I'm pretty familiar with those dynos. It's going to have the mile an hour to go in the 7s.
I'm pretty sure.
That
engine, not that car. That car's only been like 895,
right.
670. But that engine in another car we had with a 7685 830s at 183 on M5. So this one's E98 and an 8685. Man, I don't know. I'm not a very even if I have high hopes, I don't tell anybody because I don't like to be cocky.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, you saw how much attention from the Evo community it got. I think we're over 100,000 views.
I know, right? I can't believe that shit. I'm lucky when I wake up and have 1,500 views on our stuff. And he makes a video of this car that we worked on, just making a little pull from a stoplight on the street, instantaneously 10,000 views, like in a couple hours. Like, what the hell?
Yeah, like that night.
Yeah,
it was just right in front of our shop. Like,
Evo community is alive and well.
I gotta say, a friend of mine, since I was a kid, Jeremy Lair Racing Engines, one of the baddest guys that I know, just joined. He's on the podcast listing, and just wanted to say, hey, Jeremy, how's it going?
Right on. Yes, while we're speaking of shout-outs, get better, Anastasia. Our buddy Anastasia Hushinsky.
Oh,
Not feeling
not
good
feeling
tonight.
so good?
Not feeling too hot tonight.
Oh, man, she's my favorite tuner I've never met.
And sold a bunch of parts to.
Is Tom Sewell on yet?
No. Where the hell is Sewell at tonight? Or James Short?
He's probably babying it.
Right.
So
all right, CJ Cave has a question, and we missed it the first time he asked it, so it's coming around again, and I'm going to read it off here. What IAT should I be concerned non-intercooled E85? Am I leaving power on the table? 27 pounds, IAT at 210 on the top of the run from a billet 488. Plugs look safe, AFR 11.3. From an air temperature standpoint alone, you start getting into issues with it, in my opinion, somewhere around 160 to 170 degrees.
So into issues.
That's if you can't keep it under 160, in my opinion, the car would benefit from an intercooler. A lot of people, I think E85 can tolerate being pushed to that point without making adjustments in the tune to compensate. And, I feel it's a compromised combination. If you have to make concessions for air temperature. So it's my opinion that you should, I like 120, 130 as a max. Like if it's intercooled, if it's got, 130, I start getting kind of and in 140, 150, I'm like, yeah, you need to put a little extra fuel in that at that point. Have a offset table or a adder table for IAT. So when the IATs get that hot, it puts a little extra fuel in up top. So, I would invest in an intercooler or look at something to try and improve your IATs. Like hopefully you don't have the turbo set up where it's pulling preheated air off the back of the radiator. See if you can get fresh ambient temp air out from outside the engine bay into the compressor housing. I mean, I've literally had guys do that on a non-intercooled setup on the E85 where nothing but a 90-degree rubber elbow that got the top lip of the elbow above the top edge of the radiator reduced temperatures into the motor by 80 degrees. So you just need to look at what you got going on there and do all the basics for IAT temp reduction. That's why I always tell people that it's more important to get cold air into the compressor than to get hot air out of the turbine with the downpipe. Well, turn on the ninth injector, CJ. If you've got it, it's time to turn it on. You need to start turning it on about 140 degrees and then ramp its pulse width in as it gets warmer. So just be careful. In my opinion, you're playing with a grenade with the pin pulled. Hot air, non-intercooled on E85 is a recipe for busted ringlands with as little as a half to 1 degree of timing change when you start pushing the tune-up.
Scott Clark,
preach it, Brother John.
Insert sound effects, Scott Clark, of a big explosion.
You needed to have me be more ready for that earlier, in the show, because I can sit here and download it. And 8 minutes from now, I can have one, and it won't be appropriate timing. Timing is everything.
Or we can just go.
Yeah, I just, people can push 160, 170, 180 pretty regular. If your IT starts with a 2, you need to do something about it. So, big
Need
time.
to be on the right fuel.
Or getting on the right fuel would be something if you have no ability to do that. Even something like a pre-compressor meth kit shooting some M1 into the turbo. I mean, I've seen that kill 50 degrees As long as you're not trying to fuel with it, everything will be fine there.
Right.
But, you know, it's something you need to start looking at and address it. So
I know we've talked about this before, but how effective is nitrous at cooling IATs?
It's not as effective as 100% M1. It does a good job.
How effective is nitrous spraying into an intercooler?
Next to nothing.
Because I've seen people doing that lately,
on Fast
where
and
they
Furious?
have spray bars in front of the intercooler.
I mean,
That's just getting to North Dakota. Sorry.
See, the thing about air-to-airs and drag racing is they're not a dynamic part. Like during a 10 to 11 to 12 second pass, the air traveling through the intercooler on the engine side circuit is putting heat into the aluminum. But I honestly don't feel that the heat transfer is getting to the outside air in such a short run. So in my opinion, air-to-air intercoolers act like nothing more than a giant heat sink. I mean, back in the day, I used to see guys with air-to-air intercoolers on race cars. They would have this big honking intercooler, and it would be laying flat with no way to get air through it during the run whatsoever. But, you know, when they got back to the pits, they had a garden sprayer spraying ice-cold water on it. So, you know, one of the tricks with an air-to-air is to literally take the temperature of the aluminum of the intercooler down before you make a run. I mean, don't take my word for it. This is an easy test. It's something you guys can do super, super easy. If you got an intercooler, air-to-air intercooler, go to Lowe's, buy you one of those 1 gallon hand pump garden sprayers, fill that thing full of ice and water, and before you go up and make a run, just spray the thing down, front side, back side. Get that intercooler itself cold to the touch, and data log it, that run versus a run you don't spray it down. There's no telling what you might be able to see in differences in the IETs actually going into the motor.
You do have to go to a drag and tell you the starting line.
Do it in the pits and don't put so much on it that it drips when you get to the starting line, and maybe wipe any excess off, so on and so forth. But
I can tell you from my own personal experience in a test of no intercooler versus having one, I saw about 30 degrees from air to air in an 8-second pass.
30-degree gains to start to finish?
30-degree less temperature at the end than when I didn't have, like when I used it or didn't use it. I saw about 30 degrees with air to air. I was seeing about 160 at the end of a pass with my intercooler there. I was seeing 190-ish when I didn't have an intercooler as a test.
$30 degrees is pretty significant.
Mm-hmm.
It was enough for me to say it's probably worth it at that level. Now, if I was going a lot faster and making a lot more heat, it wouldn't have as much time to work. I don't know if it would make that kind of a difference. If I'm going slower and not making as much power, it probably helps a lot more because you're not making as much heat to begin with. It can only remove so much heat at a time. There's only so much BTU. Now I've got a pretty big core for what I was doing. One little tiny thing. I was a thing the same size as my radiator and 3.5 inches thick.
Yeah, guys in a drag race environment, if they would oversize their core just a little bit and think of it more as a heat sink than a dynamic,
it makes a big difference.
Yeah, they would probably get a little bit better performance out of it, and then get better performance on the street with it as well.
The problem on the street is once it heat soaks, and then that's what it is.
Yeah, well, and then it turns into a dynamic, then it turns into something that's dynamic that has to have air over it to remove the heat so it can remove heat from the air on the other side.
It's no different than using air to water on the street where you don't have a place to change out the water and it retains whatever heat it retains. Same difference as
I was just going to say it's
temperature and it stops.
Well, here's the problem with that. Here's the one thing you have to consider when you make that statement. Water is 14 times better at removing heat from aluminum than air is. And,
absolutely.
And the BTU absorption capability of 1 gallon of water or 1 cubic foot of water is a whole lot higher than it is 1 pound or 1 gallon or 1 cubic foot of air. So the thing about a good air to water system is you don't have to run the pump and put BTU into and put heat into the water unless the turbo is making heat, right? And on a good air to water system, if you're paying attention to your temps and maybe you stick a water temp gauge in your water tank, the intercooler core itself can act as its own intercooler when you're in vacuum and the water temperature is higher than the air temperature traveling through the core. It'll actually help pull heat out of the water. So that's a dynamic, that's a little bit different. But purely based on the BTU rejection capability of water versus air, I have guys with 6, 7, 8 gallon water tanks who can go out with no ice in the middle of Orlando, Florida, in the middle of summer and make a 20-pound hit and keep IATs going into the motor under 100 degrees with ambient temp water. And Dave Sedays, he's a customer of mine. He's got a 383 small block Chevrolet pickup truck in a Sport, one of the little black 1500s. And, we've got an 85 millimeter S400. It's a 383 air to water intercooled. And he literally went out one day and drove his truck all morning, this, that, and the other. He literally put like 185 miles on his truck one day, running errands, going here, going there. And we were monitoring water temperature in the intercooler tank, and it never got more than 12 degrees above ambient. And every time we cycled a data log, when he would go wide open throttle and make a hit or a pull on the interstate or do something like this and do something like that, it would log IATs. And there was 30 data logs from that day, and there was not one data log on that truck where IATs was over like 98, 97, 98 degrees.
That's nice.
In the middle of summer in Florida.
Yeah, that's like OEM grade good.
No heat exchanger in the system. So all we had was tank, pump, intercooler core. And the only strategy we employed was, when we turned the intercooler pump on and off and cycling it during vacuum while the engine was in vacuum. Sometimes while he had it in vacuum, he would turn the pump on and let it run. He had a gauge. He could watch IATs, and then we were looking at water temperature, and we were doing an experiment to see how much we could get the intercooler core to act like its own heat exchanger. And, it took 2 or 3 miles to pull the degree or two out of the water. So it worked. It wasn't really effective because obviously, you're not passing as much air over the intercooler core itself as you would if you had a heat exchanger mounted in the nose of the truck. But it can still work. And at least with the air to water, it gets hot and you heat soak it, and just find a convenience store, spend $2. That's always fun.
John, you made a comment earlier that nitrous is not as good as a cooling method as M1. Mm-hmm. Where does it sit relative to, E85 or
better
some
than
other
E85?
things?
E80, in my opinion, spraying E85 on a ninth injector is about pointless.
Yeah, I don't get much out of that. We've tried that.
It does not do much.
Better to do it with methanol.
A 50 shot of nitrous will stomp a mud hole in a ninth injector that's spraying E85. So if you're going to do a ninth injector, it needs to be, on methanol cars, obviously it works very well because you just tie it into the normal fuel system. It works a little bit on E85. It's not great. If the car's on E85, instead of doing a ninth injector tied into the fuel system, I would just do a dedicated alcohol injection system with 100% M1 tank. That would be my preference.
You might do that on top of C16 or something.
Well, C16 does. I mean, I would do it. I would do it for temperature control, and I would do 100% meth on top of C16 for temperature control and no more. But it would be, it would be 50-50 water meth or 100. I just like 100% meth, just because you don't have to worry about the water corroding and mixing and all that stuff. Just
depends a lot on classes that allow you to run it or not.
Right. I mean, some classes don't allow you to run more than a 50-50 mix, so you're obviously limited there. CJ, injector size for a ninth injector is basically just dependent upon how much volume you feel like you need to put in it to do the job. Some guys...
Roughly 10% to 15% of your other fuel volume is what you need to take all 8 injectors, add up the total. 10 to 15% of that is kind of the large side of what you need.
Right. So do
a little
that
less than one cylinder's worth.
Use that as a limit and use that to pick the injector size that you put there. Yeah, John, that's some nice data you provided on the difference between non-intercooled and intercooled. 170 degrees difference is a big difference.
It's a lot of power. That's a lot of horsepower in our testing.
Yeah. He said it went the same speed with 6 pounds less boost. So 6 pounds less boost, man, that's almost a half an atmosphere of boost.
Right.
So that's basically 50% of what the engine made naturally aspirated.
Right.
So that's a fairly significant difference in power level just based on pressure.
It's also going to be easier on everything in the motor too.
Yeah, I mean, big reduction in heat stress.
Yeah, fuel stability or the combustion stability way up.
Right,
yeah.
Vaporization of fuel in intake ports and the garbage that gets left in the intake ports and valve seats and valves and when you got really high temperatures like that, it's hard on parts. It's not easy on parts at all.
We're gonna have so many people listening, and wait, here we got some questions coming up. Sorry, I've been neglecting the YouTube crowd. Sorry.
M5 is nothing more than M1 with a fuel additive called ETBE in it that nowadays I don't even really think it's worth trying M5. It's some nasty stuff. I don't know. I've breathed in a mouthful of that stuff a time or two, and M1's nasty enough.
It's about a 5% increase in power, but it's about a 40% increase in corrosion and other problems.
Yeah, I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze when it comes from M1 to M5.
All right. What else?
Do we have a minute for a question to go back a little ways? We were talking about the exhaust from the wastegates and blending that back into the dump tube, down tube.
Mm-hmm.
Is it better to just completely keep them separate the whole time, or is it actually better to bring them in such a way that you're evacuating the wastegate tube?
I prefer just to dump them to atmosphere all the time, personally. I don't necessarily know that there's been anybody that has tried to create a evac tube effect with the dump tubes to the point where it was better than just dumping them to atmosphere and dealing with it.
I think I was actually fighting something on that a while back on a tune I did, because there were some things that I noticed the guy had it plumbed in, and I noticed it seemed to be a lot harder to tune the PID for that car. And I've always noticed it's been a challenge, but there was one that he specifically took it in like at a 45-degree angle, and it seemed to be significantly harder for me to get the PID really, really, really fine-tuned and really solid versus just dumping it out. And I don't know if it's specific to that, but that happened to be the common thing that I noticed on that vehicle.
Yeah, I don't think I would just dump them. Just make some screamer pipes. Have some fun with them.
Build some mini mufflers if it's too loud.
Super Trap mufflers for dirt bikes and street bikes. They've got some stuff that's like 1.5 inches, 1 7/8, 2 inch inlets. And those Super Trap mufflers are really good about killing noise without causing pressure.
And I have found that there's nothing on the planet better than a Super Trap if you want to kill power.
Really?
Yeah.
They that bad, huh?
They that bad.
Oh, there's some pretty bad stuff out there.
I've got a couple of guys that have used them as mufflers for the down tubes, and the data hasn't shown that they've.
Oh, for a down tube, I was thinking as the main exhaust.
No. Just for the screamer tubes for the wastegates.
I could see. That I could see.
Because I can tell you that when a turbo, if you've got some good sized gates on a car, and you've got hood dumps or you got fender dumps, when the gates open. You know quite well when the gate's open. So I've seen some guys use Super Traps just on the wastegate outlet. Jason, I can't necessarily answer how you piggyback a ninth injector. It would be dependent upon the ECU you're running. Systems like the Holley Dominator, where there's extra drivers, you can write a program for it to run the ninth injector separate from the other 8. So it would kind of be dependent upon what ECU you have. And I would highly suggest that you not put that fuel injector pre-intercooler. I would suggest that you put it post-intercooler just for safety's sake.
Yeah, you will end up with a puddle.
No matter how little you put into it, there's always the risk that you can the temperature differential across the intercooler core will make that stuff fall out of suspension and puddle in the intercooler core. And it is not a pretty sight when something happens to make that light off.
Matt Vaughn, I have a Super Trap on my Harley. It works great. How would you know?
He probably tested it. Maybe he did.
What's that?
He might have tested it. Matt's pretty solid. He's in Australia.
But it's a Harley. It's like
Flow Masters. They're death on flow.
Yeah, but that's on something that makes over 300 horsepower. It's not in the.
It's all scalable. Maybe that's a giant exhaust for that motor, and it doesn't matter. Who knows? Matt, you have to let us know if you did any testing. If not, you must get it on a motorcycle dyno.
Would that be a hub motorcycle dyno?
No, I don't think you can do that.
Now that would be kind of funny.
You smart ass.
Not a fan of the hubs here. Not by any manufacturers, awesome. Nothing specific. I just don't like the hub dynos. I think they're way overhyped right now.
Oh, Matt said he had it on a dyno.
Nice.
So
okay.
I've had a anonymous question sent to me privately. Says intercooled C16 versus non-intercooled methanol, 2,000 to 2,300 horsepower, small block.
Are they asking what you would go with? Depending on your weight, if you can spare a little bit of weight, I'd go the C16 route. If you got to go lighter weight, I'd go the methanol route and overbuild the motor a little bit so you don't have to lean on it too hard. Whatever your horsepower target. If you build a 2,800 horsepower combo and detune it to 23 to 24, whatever.
Well, it's a small block, so
that's a
probably 2,500 detuned at the most.
Sure.
I don't see very many small blocks out there knocking on 3,000 horsepower, especially given who sent the question. Not anonymous to me, so I understand it. But
sure.
The architecture on this particular combo would be like 2,400 detuned to 2,000 maybe. So he's going to be operating in the given range. From a pure weight standpoint, I wouldn't have kind of depends on street use versus race use. 100% race car, methanol. No question about it. If you want to put miles on it, and if the car is already set up for the intercooler, I would just make sure that the size of the intercooler was sufficient and continue to run it on C16. Because that's a 5.
If you want to put miles on it, the cool thing is you can drive on pump gas when you really need to.
Yeah, or you can just be a good enough tuner that you can get 7-8 miles of the gallon out of the car on M1 and have a 15 or 20 gallon cell in the back. But that kind of defeats the purpose of wanting to go to M1 to get light, right? So, is the car set up for an intercooler already, I would just leave it alone versus trying to set it up for methanol or set it up for dual fuel, have two fuel.
Methanol with an intercooler is great, though. It doesn't need one. Guess what? It's still okay with one. It still does a lot.
It still makes power with one. Still makes power with one. For sure.
Are we winding it down? What do we got? What else we got here?
Karen asked what the highest compression for a turbo small block on M1. My limit personally is somewhere between 12 and 12 and a half. After that, I don't think there's any benefit from having more static compression in the motor. Yeah, Lee, we missed your question about max effort plenum size. I think the people you're taking advice from are spot on. 200 to 250 of engine size. I'm spot on with that. Street cars don't.
We might talk to our guest next week about that too. See what he thinks. I think he's probably going to say about the same thing.
I'm good at 200%. 200% is hard to get. Like, no joke, unless you're building a dedicated intake manifold from scratch, to have an intake manifold that has 200% plenum volume and it has proper runner length for the application is not an easy thing to accomplish. It gets you get some creative looking designs there as far as the intercoolers as far as the intake manifold is concerned.
Gets harder once you're trying to squeeze it in a specific space as well. If you have a limit of 3 cal or
you got a height limit,
you got to get real creative.
Yep, it can look really goofy, and it's hard. It's hard to get up there because that's what you're trying to do with a big block in a Fox body.
Yeah, how dumb is that?
You and your bread block. I swear to God, dude, if I can ever get to your car and if I had the opportunity to do it, I'm going to get a vinyl sticker of a fucking loaf of bunny bread and I'm going to lay that bitch right over top of your intake manifold so it looks like there's a damn loaf of bunny bread on top of that big block.
Send it. I'll put it on there.
No.
Wonder Bread.
Yeah. Wonder Bread. No, Lee, the 200% is purely plenum. The runner is the runner. The plenum is the plenum. The plenum stops when the runner starts.
Does making an oddball shape in order to get to that kind of plenum volume begin to defeat the purpose because you're going to end up with air sitting in places that it doesn't do you any good?
I don't know. I've seen some pretty weird shaped things that were optimized.
Well, it depends. The air still is the shape is weird.
Yeah,
Mark. You need to have.
It's still a big pressure box.
But you need to have good shape in the transition from the throttle body to the plenum.
Yeah.
And you need to have good shape in the transition from the plenum to the runner. But if the plenum has to be deeper or this or that, and it's in an area where it's not going to cause turbulent airflow, then all it is volume and it doesn't matter. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Matt, is the square port truck intake 14 liters of volume with or without the runners taken out that extend into the plenum? Because there's a lot of volume in that intake taken up by the runner itself. I can see it being 14 liters, not counting, not deducting the runners, but I can't see that intake being 14 liters of plenum volume with the runners deleted out of it.
Yeah, there's no way because it's almost all runner inside the plenum. It's not even that big of a plenum. It's all runner.
Yep. Yeah, I don't think it's. I mean, the volume of that might be, with the outside overall dimension of the intake might be 14 liter, but not with the runner sections taken out. Brad Snyder's, that's not even a hard question to answer. It would be C or Q. I don't know that you need to. I would try C on the car you're asking that question, or don't know that I would try Q on the car you're asking that question about. But I personally don't think ethanol is race fuel.
No on Q for the same reasons as no on M5.
Yes.
It's the same nasty stuff. We
almost did some Q testing this weekend, and then the guys decided they didn't need to push the combo as hard. They had to work on chassis first up at Endless, but we're going to be back on their dyno with some Q versus C, relatively max effort. It's a Coyote engine, but it's pretty typical combo. But we'll do some testing on that. It's about 1,100 horse at the wheels, 1,150, 1,200, something like that on a dyno just like Jimmy's, the Mustang, the big all-wheel drive Mustang dyno.
Timing, David Grew. Timing is not power. Airflow is power.
Amen.
Yeah.
Say amen.
Amen. I need to get me like an amen sound effect, but I got this one here. Okay.
Timing. I wouldn't. If your motor picks up because you put timing in it, that means the timing is out before was not the ideal timing for your motor. So
here's the easiest way to explain that. Instead of explaining it as in advanced timing, which we're used to seeing when we build a table, you got to think of it as where the actual spark event occurs inside the cylinder, right? Just because your spark event in the ECU says 27 degrees before, that's when it starts to fire. But the actual compression that happens from that explosion in the cylinder is going to be the same basic spot on most motors. There are exceptions, but most of them fall on a very, very similar spot, known as MBT, right? There's a spot that's roughly 12 to 15 degrees after top dead center when the piston is already crested and it's starting to move, where if you push down on it, it gets the most ideal push. And that's what you were searching for. Your chamber in your head and the cylinder itself determine whether or not you fire it sooner or later. Hemis, for example, being that 7 or 8 degrees that they want to be at versus 24 to 28 degrees on LS versus 35 or 40 on some small blocks. You can see that there's a big variance there. All three are looking for that same similar spot where the piston is already starting to move down and it's pushing down on it to help it.
Yep.
So we don't care about what the timing number is. We care about what the end result of that timing number gets us. If you have to add more timing, that means that your chamber is less efficient, which means you have to fire the spark sooner in order to make it happen. You also have more pumping losses when you have to fire it sooner because you're acting partially as the piston is still coming up if you're firing it before top dead center.
MBT, mean best timing, for those of you playing at home.
Yeah, there's about 17 different explanations for that acronym, but maximum brake torque.
Lee Connor, a tuner I know, has done back-to-back C16 versus Q, and it said it was worth 5 to 6%. No one said that Q wouldn't make a little more power.
No, 5 to 6%, bullshit. Somebody plugged in a spark plug. No way.
The problem is 1%. What Q does to your cylinder walls.
Yeah. Well,
if you don't,
and everything else.
Yeah, and everything else.
If you're running a class limited deal like Brad runs, there's a limit to how much air you can get in the motor because there's rules on how big of a turbo they can run. Then
you have to
make sense because you're trying to get that last 1, 2, 3%.
5 or 6%, no fucking way. I mean, there's something wrong with that test or a tune in one of those two tunes.
Right, but the point is the reason why we said what we said about Q wasn't because of that it can't make a little bit more power. It's because it's such nasty stuff to work with.
Now, you guys know that they've been changing some of the chemicals around. Aren't there ETBEs instead of MTBEs and some of those now?
The E stuff is so much work. In my opinion, I've been around long enough that I was around for MBTE on that stuff. MTBE, whatever the hell the acronym is for the shit. Butyl ethylene or something crap.
I don't know. They call it nitroparaffins is what I've heard.
That's the trade name that they give it, but it was methyl tetrahydrobutyl ethylene or something was the actual scientific name for it. And now instead of methyl, it's ethyl. And in my opinion, it's worse.
Better or worse?
It hurts.
We need to get a fuels guy on here. If anybody out there listening knows maybe some of the chemists.
We need to get Pooch on here. Pooch, get on here and he can explain it all to us.
Yeah. All right.
We get Pooch on here. And yeah, Brad, I mean, I understand why you're on Q. I just don't think it's worth it.
I think that test needs to be rerun, Brad. You need to let one of us.
Brad didn't do the testing. Lee said his tuner's the one that did the testing, but Brad's the one that's running the limited turbo deal and tries, and trying to get the absolute last half a pound of airflow and horsepower out of that thing. So, it's just one of those things. Is the juice worth the squeeze? I mean, do you need that last 20 horse? If yes, then run it. If not, then don't. It's not, in my opinion, it's not worth the maintenance required to get that last
you will be tearing down your engine a lot more often on Q16.
Yeah. Maybe. I mean, I know a lot of guys that run Q.
It just depends on what. I mean, if you spec the parts for the fuel and you understand what you're doing with it, and you don't. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of these race cars, these max effort guys are tearing down more often than they're going to run into corrosion problems. They're not, a lot of these guys are tearing down every race weekend. So I mean, that's I don't know. I'm okay with it. I can see it making a half a point more power if your two tunes are on point, but. I mean, one of the things I did this weekend is I went up to AJ Kunkel's shop at Endless Performance and hung out with John Bazansky and all those guys, and we worked on making their dyno work repeatably. Like, we were not making changes to anything and seeing how it would repeat and kind of validating the dyno first and foremost. Dude, that takes a lot of work. You're not good. I'd say 80% of the places out there are not set up repeating properly. Guys are like, oh, the dyno makes more power in this gear than that gear and this stuff. Look, it's not measuring properly. Something isn't right, especially if you have a load-bearing dyno and it's showing different stuff. So anyway, I'd like to rerun that test. I'd like to take that to a dyno that I got to help set up that I'm comfortable on and see if we're going to run the Q versus the C at some point in their car, China White. So we'll see what we get out of that. But I would bet you it's a 0.5% gain. It's probably what I would predict, which is a little bit. It's enough on a max effort combo, like John said. That's why it exists. But somebody's saying, "Oh man, I got 6% gain on switching to Q." Immediately questioning everything about that. That's just me.
Brad, I
6% better tune.
I'm right. I've got something in the works for you. I didn't ignore the private messages you sent me the other day. I was looking at them, and I've been mulling them over, and I got something for you to try. It'll be on the way shortly. Comp's only taking about 5 days right now, so look for a care package from me. Love you. Bye.
Mark, do you want to talk about that event up in North Dakota that's coming up?
Well, yeah, it was part of my grind my gears. But we've got new owners at the drag strip up here, and it's a couple of guys that have pretty much put everything that they have out on the chopping block to make this work. And I'm a little taken aback by the what do you want to call it? The backstabbing or the
lack of attendance, I guess. Is that what you're getting at? Speak faster, my man.
Yeah, there's people that are complaining about how they're running the track, or complaining about this or complaining about that. The point is we have a racetrack that's local to us, that's 6 miles away, and there's people that are like, I don't want to support the track because the new track owners they aren't for bracket racing. They're only for no prep, or they're only for the drift events, or they're only for this. Well, they bought a brand new John Deere tractor. They built a custom hydraulic assembly for it to drag tires. They brought in mass traction last year to teach them how to do prep. These guys are doing everything they can do to give us a good racetrack. Just support it. Now, that being said, they also poured concrete for a drift track, and it's like a 888 or something. I don't understand drifting. I've never been to a drift event. I'm going to go this weekend because this weekend they've got $10,000 to win drift challenge, and it's $10,000 to win, $2,500 for second, $1,000 for third, $500 for fourth, guaranteed purse. And it's this Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I've never followed drifting because I think of it more as a popularity contest. But when they're with this kind of purse, they're going to be bringing in the known racers, the pros, whatever. It's going to be a good event. I'm going to be at the track. I admit it. I'm going to my first drift event. I'm looking forward to it. But you guys that live in other parts of the country, support the track that's local to you. Get involved with the track that's local to you, because if you don't, it will not be there. That's all I had to say.
Preach it, Brother Mark. Yeah. Tell them all about it. All right.
Well, you got to support it.
I'm with you.
Yes, you do.
Support your local tracks.
If they're not doing the right thing, find solutions instead of complaining.
Anytime you have a complaint, you should have a suggestion for the improvement. It's the rule number one.
We had one racer that was complaining about the price of a Rice Krispie bar or something. Bitch, 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 and bitch, 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 bitch. Then he went to the oval track races on a Friday night, and he comes back the next week. He goes, I guess the prices here aren't so bad. You know, it's like, and you're bitching about the racetrack because of the price of a fucking Rice Krispie bar. Get over it.
Are you done? Are you done complaining tonight, Mark? Bring us out on a negative ending. Go back and look at all my messages. I'm like, wrap it up, dude. Wrap it up, dude. You know we love you.
Fine, I'm done.
You know we love you. I just had to play the song twice. So, all right, man. That's it. You guys stick around. We'll talk in a little bit. Now, let's see. What do we got coming up here for classes? Advanced Standalone EFI Tuning class in Detroit, July 13th, 14th at Full Throttle Speed. That's the Motor City. Reserve your seat at RealTuners.com for that class. That's a pretty cool deal. Thanks again for listening, everybody. It's been 2 really good years. Hopefully we can keep doing a few more years of this. Really enjoying myself, having a good time, and getting to know all you guys out there. It's been a really cool experience. So anyway, thanks for listening, and we will talk to you guys next week for sure. Sounds like we're going to have Chris Smith on. Everybody take care and have a safe week.